Welcome to the Airline Pilot Podcast. I'm Jason Ambrosi. Today, I'm joined by Colonel Bill Edwards, the Director of Counter-Unmanned Aerial Systems Operations for ENSCO. I recently saw Bill give a presentation on the threat of drones to commercial aviation and counter-drone technology at our cargo symposium, and I immediately thought this information is something all members would like to know. So I'm glad to have you here as part of our podcast to share this information. Bill, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be here.
So before we get into the meat of the drone stuff, you've got quite a background from what we've talked about before we met. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I retired from the military in 2018 after a fairly long career. Most of my career was spent in tactical organizations, so tactical divisions. Did multiple tours to Iraq, commanded a battalion in Iraq in 2010 to 11. Then went to advanced schooling when I was a little more senior. Went to SOCOM and U.S. SOCOM in my last assignment as a director of intelligence for a TSOC, a Theater Special Operations Command. And then retired in 2018 and had a real passion for this evolving technology, which I call small drones or small UAS. And really it started when I was a commander in Iraq because I was actually flying smaller drones as part of my mission. We had the Shadow platform, which most people are aware of. And it was an ISR drone, an intelligence surveillance reconnaissance drone. From that point, 2010, let's say 2011, until now, we've seen a dramatic change in this robotic ecosystem.
Yeah, and honestly, I'll be the first to admit that I knew this was an issue. We know they're out there. We hear every once in a while where they're not where they're supposed to be. But man, I'll tell you what, you pointed out information that I had no idea. Obviously, thank you for your service and everything you've done for our country. Let's jump into the numbers. Why are drones such a big threat? And talk about some of the numbers you shared with us last week.
Okay. The evolution of the small drone was rapidly pushed on us because of conflicts across the globe, primarily Ukraine. But we also see the conflicts in the Middle East where the development of small drones was moving fairly rapidly. I think around 2014, 2015, we know that some of the bad actors in the Middle East were starting to experiment with drones as a strike capability, as a precision strike capability. But really where it took off was in this what I call this major laboratory in Ukraine where all these experiments are taking place with small robotics. And it's not limited to aerial. We see it ground robotics, we see aquatic, surface and subsurface as well. But really where it caught my attention was the aerial platform and the evolution of that small platform to what it is now, which is an incredible precision strike capability in a small platform that you can commercially buy it. You know, it's readily available on your favorite website.
Yeah, on Amazon or something. You can get
something like that.
It's unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, there's the bad actors you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
or the people that are using it for military purposes, but you had some really enlightening numbers related to a study that you had done on several U.S. airports. I'll pick Miami for an example.
Yeah.
That over a period of, I guess, less than 2 years, there was, I think, 18,000 drones that wandered into what we would consider our airspace as airline pilots.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. It's really what we would call or categorize as known detections. And detecting that small drone in that airspace, the numbers are amazing that we've seen and we've talked about specifically across just a sampling of airports in the country. So it's important to realize, especially for airline pilots and for people in aviation, that we have this new safety threat, I think, around aviation flight. And it's something that we need to tackle fairly quickly, get our hands around it so that we can feel safer with our airports, and our pilots need to feel the same way based on just the promulgation of the technology. How many of these drones exist in our country? I think numbers vary, but registered drones in the United States through government websites show 800,000 to 900,000 drones, but those are registered users.
Yeah.
Those are not the unregistered users, which there's really no mechanism to force registration on these platforms when you buy them. So it's not like it's mandatory. So I give the analogy of when you turn 16, you're required to take a driver's course and then take a driver's test to get a license. And that's mandatory to drive a car. In this country, there's no mechanism to say you must have a FAA Part 107 license in order to own a drone, and that's for commercial use. But even recreational drones that are 0.55 pounds, really smaller drones and less, aren't even required to have a pilot license. So we have some issues with the evolution of this technology.
Circling back to those massive numbers, like 18,000 at Miami or 6,000 at Seattle or whatever we were talking about, that's not even all of them. So you said that was the ones that are detectable. So we're at a factor of 2 or 3 on the actual numbers that are in this airspace. I don't know how we're not running into these things on a daily basis.
Right, correct, yeah. So the detections are known detections, like I said, but there are if the system being used is not a full spectrum radio frequency detector, which isn't technically allowed to be used in this country, so it's got to be a detector that focuses on a specific platform, and those platforms don't tell the real numbers. So when you see a number of known detections, I like to use a factor of 2 or 3 to say that's close, but you probably need to multiply that by 2 or 3 to really know what's flying around this airport or this facility or whatever it may be.
So we talked about all these events, or whether it's a sporting event or other critical infrastructure, airports. How many of these have asked for support versus how many have been supported in this process?
That's a great question, because I recently just read a statistic. I think, let me get it right, but I think from 2018, the number was roughly 121,000 requests for support of drone detection and mitigation across the country. But based on the law we were operating under at the time, again, mitigation or defeat was centralized at the federal government level. And so out of that 121,000 requests, I believe the number was 77 were actually supported. I like to mention that because before Safer Skies Act, we've been operating under a 2018 law with a technology in 2026 that's evolved so fast. We've outpaced what people really thought was capable from these platforms. And I think we're slowly waking up to it. We have a lot of work to do, so please help us all. If you hear this podcast, please help us all get the delegation of authority for mitigation and defeat down to the lowest level and trained and certified operators, and then I think we'll be in a good place.
And how available are these drones? Anybody can get one, right?
Yeah, we could buy one right now. We could stop the podcast and actually click on Amazon and go on. In fact, I just did buy one. I just bought one last Friday. And it was already at my house by Sunday, and I was able to fly it. And I'll tell you what's great about that is I broke it out of the box, I set it up, it recognized my facial biometrics, and then I put it into flight mode, and it followed me as I was walking my dog. So it followed me the entire walk.
Wow. How about that? Interesting.
But the reason I highlight that is because the technology built in to these platforms is very sophisticated. And a lot of them come with avoidance detection. A lot of them come with follow me. They know how to maneuver. There's just a lot of different technologies that would have been maybe considered military grade a few years ago or 5 years ago that are now built into
readily available.
Readily.
So obviously with all those numbers we just talked about, they're not bad actors, or we would be seeing things happening. So let's talk about bad actors a bit. What improper uses of these drones do we face today?
Yeah, I mean, we can go back to 2017 where we can trace people using small drones for things that what I would consider are not careless and clueless. So if, the careless and clueless flyers out there are pilots. These are people that are trying to maybe get pictures of airplanes, right? They're trying to get pictures of their favorite sports player. They're just not aware, or they could be aware, but they're breaking a rule that they don't understand they're breaking, because there's really no guidance out there that tells them they can or they can't. And so someone with nefarious intent, or someone that wants to do something with the drone, it's readily available. Any type of technique is readily available on social media. You can go out and do a search and find some way to put a release mechanism on your drone so that you can drop eggs on the homeless, like happened in New Hampshire. Or you can do this do-it-yourself modification of drones as well. So it's not hard. I teach it all the time, where you simply we talked about Amazon. Go to Amazon and look for a release mechanism. You can find it for under $40.
Wow.
And then put it on your drone and do what happened in New Hampshire. We also saw in New Jersey not too long ago where a drone operator put a type of chemical on their drone. It was really like more of a coloring, a food coloring kind of liquid, and dropped it into swimming pools. So the pools turned green and yellow. But that shows capability,
Yeah.
right? And it also shows that it's easily done by
Right.
someone that's just doing it in their garage.
For sure. And you shared with us, back to a non-nefarious one. Obviously, they shouldn't have been there, but you showed us a video, and it's readily available on social media, that of Las Vegas on final, and the drone filmed a landing aircraft from above.
Yeah,
I mean, that's insane. That's
Yeah.
not supposed to happen.
Right. That was shocking. And the video is a little dated, which even makes it more scary because the drone technology at that time wasn't even. So this is, I think the video was probably 2018, 2019.
Oh, that's that old. Okay.
Yeah. But I show that for that purpose, though, because this is 2026 and the technology wasn't that evolved at that time.
Yeah.
So that operator could have lost control. That operator could have caused some serious flight disruption. Especially with that flight specifically was like a Frontier Airlines flight, I believe, on final. And those pilots had no idea it was above them.
Yeah.
They just did not know. And this is the problem. I talk to the pilots quite a bit at your events and try to make awareness. But it's also, how do we help pilots? How do we help our aviation sector with this issue? Because it's only growing.
So let's talk about the stuff we had touched on in Ukraine, where they're using these for military purposes. There's photos of a small drone, I guess would be like a class 1 or whatever, where they've zip tied a mortar to it.
Correct.
And they're going after the other side in transportation vehicles or whatever. Yeah. There's nothing to say that couldn't happen here. They can be used to strike for critical infrastructure or airports or anything, right?
Yeah, so airports are critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
That's my humble opinion. Hopefully we classify it that way in the country. But what we've seen in Ukraine is beyond what I think they've promulgated this technology as a nefarious platform like 20 years into the future, maybe even further. I'm just guessing, but you're right. And most of the payloads on these small platforms, and you described it, so they're using Category 1 drones that are 20 pounds or less. These are small drones, but they can carry significant payloads because the motors are fairly capable, the propellers are capable. The systems the frames are light, normally carbon fiber or aluminum, something of that nature. So they can carry a significant payload. Normally it's 1 kilo of an explosive that we see with a copper cone built into that to form a shape charge, which is really something that's very dangerous. And that's all done homemade. Basically, what they call the zero line is the front line. And you see this type of ordnance or payload development taking place right there. So they're harvesting TNT from different aspects in Ukraine, maybe even tank mines. They'll dig the TNT out, they'll melt it down, they'll put it into. So they're literally making the homemade bomb. But you also see the different types of mortar rounds. You also see what we call RPGs, rocket propelled grenades are used. The quote I heard recently is they'll use anything and everything that can explode, and they'll put it on a drone to do that. What's more dangerous about all of this is that they're flying most of the drone missions in what's called first-person view, which is a pilot in goggles virtually on the platform or the drone itself. So as it flies, the pilot is with it, right, virtually. And that's what creates the precision.
How hard is it to detect one of these attacks?
Yeah. In the combat zones, like Ukraine, the Middle East, other places, we're seeing this in Africa. Africa's exploding with this technology. South America, Mexico, obviously. I think the statistic I saw recently, just as an example, somewhere around 60,000 cartel flights on the south side of the border. We're seeing it in Southeast Asia. It's global is the point. But to detect in the United States, if we have a detection system, I think above all, most essential to that detection layer, it's different sensors, but radar is predominant. You have RF sensors and then optical, which are cameras, and then, of course, acoustic. If you have the time and the space to see the drone in enough time to make a decision, that's what these sensors are supposed to do. They're supposed to give you distance, so basically time and space.
Gotcha.
In these conflict zones, it's a lot different. So there's electronic warfare, so there's constant jamming of signals. That's why the technology has promulgated to fiber command and control, because then the drone flies dark. It doesn't give a signal.
Okay.
And then it's undetectable unless you have radar, because radar finds objects.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't have a signal, then it's literally undetectable. And that's what makes it, to me, when we start thinking about the homeland and we start thinking about society, when these drones start flying in a mode that doesn't emit an active signal, then we have a bigger problem on detection. Detection's already hard to do, but now it's being more complicated.
So when you say it's on a fiber, basically it's on a string that could be miles long.
Correct. Yeah, it's a fiber optic cable. I see fiber spools all the time, 20 and 30 kilometer spools.
Wow.
And that's based obviously on terrain because
Sure.
there's a lot of open terrain in Ukraine in that area. And so they can fly long distances. But we're also starting to see that the fiber is being strengthened so that it can't break. And then that's the potential for urban operations with the same type of technology.
Wow, that's definitely scary. So what prevention or detection techniques are available? How do they, for lack of a better term, shoot one of these out of the sky?
Yeah. Unfortunately, drones are considered by the FAA no different than an aircraft or a large passenger aircraft. So they're categorized the same, which makes the problem a little bit harder because it falls under two United States codes, 49 and 18. That's really all about aircraft safety, is what those two are about. And you're well aware of that. But these drones fall under those same laws. And so what we're advocating for is that we holistically protect critical infrastructure in this country, which includes our airports. To me, primarily, it should be airports up at the top of the list, but we're also talking about water, power, nuclear
Right.
power, sensitive sites, military installations, etc. So we have to have the right detection sensors in place. We have to have the right mitigation tools in place, which is your ability to defeat that drone, but then we also have to have the legal authority to detect and defeat that drone, which I believe, and I'm hopeful, and I think the Congress is working on. We just had Safer Skies Act passed into law about December 20th, but I think it officially went into effect 5 January. But that's a law that starts to delegate defeat or mitigation of a drone to our SLTT, our state, local, territorial, and tribal law enforcement agencies. The caveat is they must be certified and trained by the federal government before they can use that type of equipment. So we have a long way to go.
Right.
But we need to get that type of rule or system all the way down to people that provide security for airports,
Right.
provide security for mass gathering events, critical infrastructure, you name it, parades, theme parks, whatever.
Yeah, well, we saw at the World Series that somebody was in there with a drone in Toronto, right?
Correct.
This is already happening. How many of our airports or critical things in our country are protected today?
To the extent I just described, unless one of those facilities or places falls under one of three categories, it's a DoD installation, it's critical infrastructure designated by DHS and the systems are available, or it's a SEER event, which is a special event designated by DHS, Homeland, in a 1 through 5 category. Those places are not protected. So think in terms of this. I'll explain it a little better. A World Series or a Super Bowl will be a SEER 1 event.
Okay.
Because it's very important to the country.
Right.
And so those events will be protected. But the reason I'm doing this and the reason I'm talking about it so much is that that's less than 1% of all the things that are happening that are important to us in the country, and we're not able to provide that. Now, Safer Skies gives us some breathing room to train, certify
Other people,
other
right.
law enforcement
Right.
organizations. But the problem I see with it is that we have one place that's doing the training, one organization that's responsible for certification. So logically, there's a capacity problem because we have a lot of people that need to get trained,
Right.
but we don't have the capacity yet. I'm sure it'll build out.
I'm guessing there's a hardware constraint to get these systems created and built and deployed once the human capital part of it is solved.
The systems, so they have what's called, and I'll use this term. They have a blue list. So they have a list that's approved of type, and we're talking specifically now about defeating what we may think is a threat drone, or even if it's a careless or clueless drone that's in the wrong area, like an airport runway.
Because you don't know whether
You don't know.
nefarious, right?
Correct. So in order to defeat that drone, there are technologies that are approved for use, and normally It's a jamming technology or it's a take control of the signal technology is really what it is. They exist already.
Okay.
So the private sector or the market can provide it.
Okay.
It's just a matter of we need the authorities. And we need the authorities to go even further than they're going now with Safer Skies Act, because we just have so many things to protect in the country day to day. We're going to start our Major League Baseball season in a couple weeks, right? Those are all open air stadiums. But just day to day, we have theme parks and parades and speeches, and anywhere the public gathers in mass is something we should be.
Think about how many theme parks there are, like Disney and Six Flags and all these kind of places.
Well, I mean, how many airports are there?
Oh, yeah, airports. Obviously.
Hundreds or thousands, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So you mentioned to take over the control aspect of it. What other ways are you don't just? I get you showed in Ukraine that one of the more simple ways of trying to avoid these things with the old school shotgun.
Yes.
But obviously that's not going to work at an airport or something like that.
If we're talking specifically about the homeland, right? United States proper, we're not in a conflict zone here. Really what you're going to try to use are technologies that limit, if the drone is defeated or mitigated, it limits the collateral damage if that drone potentially falls out of the sky.
Okay.
So they're being very careful with the type of technologies they're allowing to use here that still work. Now, if you're in a conflict zone, you're going to use every technology. You're going to have a kinetic option. You're going to have a jamming option or electronic warfare option. You'll have a GPS disruption option. And you'll also have directed energy weapons.
Yeah.
We call DEWs.
Yes.
High-powered lasers, high-powered microwaves, EMP, those types of things. But when we specifically talk about protecting in the homeland, we have to be cognizant of what collateral damage might be.
Where the thing falls, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Or if technically or theoretically what happens if a drone signal is jammed, you're jamming the signal from the controller. When I say that, most drones are controlled by a ground control station or your phone, right, or your iPhone or your Android. So if you remove that signal between the operator and the drone, basically you're jamming that signal.
Okay.
What will technically happen is the drone will either land itself because it can't see the signal or read it, or it will return to its original location. Now, if the operator is nefarious and they want to program that drone to return to a location that's not where it started from, they could technically do that as well. So we have to be careful with how that technology is implemented, but I think I've always said that what's going to be accepted here, at least from a collateral damage potential perspective, is take control of the signal. And then you have the ability to land that drone in an area where you want it to go, and also you have to be prepared at that point to inspect or interrogate the payload with someone that's professionally trained to do that. So you can't just walk up on a drone that's landed. I wouldn't do that. I would create some sort of small team that's, maybe has an explosive ordnance or a hazmat professional to actually do that type of work.
To assess it. Wow, that's certainly a lot to think about. Is there other parts of the world where these systems have been deployed at airports, or is everybody in the same boat we are?
I was just in Europe recently, and I pulled up the statistics on European airports. They're having the same issues.
Okay.
In fact, in many cases, I think it might even be equal to what we're seeing here in the U.S., just from known detections. And I think it's global.
Right.
So even the pilots in your organization who are flying globally, and then if you're flying into austere environments, Africa, some places where, it's really not as developed, I think you have to even be more aware, and you have to even be more sensitive to your situation, right? Your environment. And we call it situational awareness.
Sure. Yeah. We obviously expect this to get worse because these things are easier to get. We've talked a little bit about the solution, deploying these things. What kind of timeline is realistic to say, if someone listens to this and says, wow, this threat's a lot bigger than I thought it was, which I'm one of those from your presentation last week and our conversations before and after that presentation. What's a timeline? How realistic is it that we can mitigate this threat in a reasonable period of time?
It really depends on how far we're willing to go to trust our security and safety and emergency preparedness professionals to do this, to make these types of decisions. Like I mentioned in the beginning, detecting a small drone. Remember, these small drones, they fly very fast.
Yeah.
They're very agile, and they can carry significant payloads if it's a nefarious act. So I guess the question that we should be asking is, how much decision time do we have between detection and then actually mitigating a drone in that specific use case? My guess is it's minutes and not like multiple minutes.
Right.
My guess is it's minutes. So that's why detection technologies, the companies out there, if you're listening, you have to give us the range to find these drones in the airspace
as early as possible,
and then give our decision makers the tools to mitigate that drone in a decision cycle. Now, we can argue that AI may help us do that, or we could automate that system, which I think businesses are trying to do. But I just published an article a few days ago on common operating picture. So we call it COP in the military, common operating picture. But it gives you a visualization of all the data layers that are coming in from the sensor. So you have an RF sensor, a radar sensor, an optical sensor, and that's feeding you a visual of where that drone's at in time and space. You also need to do the same for your mitigation tools or your defeat tools so that you can cue detection to defeat in a time that allows you to take care of it before it's right on you.
Yeah. So
the answer to the question, long story long here, is you've got to delegate that authority to the lowest level, in my humble opinion, down to, let's say at airports, right? We have security teams. We've got to get security teams that are specifically focused on drone detection, potentially drone defeat, train, certify them, hold them accountable for their mission, but quality control it, but go to the lowest level possible. One of the things we do in the military, and I think most people agree with me, is we normally centrally plan things that we're going to do, and we decentrally execute those plans because we empower our people in our organizations to understand what the mission is and to do it. We've got to do the same thing with this technology because here's what's happened. Physical security in this country is dead the way we handle it now because we don't consider the air domain as part of the physical security threat. It's not part of how professionals out there are taught to go and establish a security program, name the installation. It doesn't matter. Name the business, name the facility. Everyone has the same legacy playbook. That playbook is no longer relevant with small drones. That's significant to me.
That is definitely significant. At ALPA, we have many pilot volunteers on our safety and security side that are either liaisons to these airports that work on this stuff. They're part of the UAS committees and things at various organizations. Is there anything they can do to try to bring more awareness to this, get the airports to do what they need to do, encourage them along? What would you recommend to our own internal volunteers that work on it?
Yeah, it's great. And I'm glad you have that type of force out into the airline and airport ecosystem. Really, it starts with education and training, just like you all do. You bring me in to educate you and different bodies of ALPA on what's happening in the small drone world. And so that's step one. Once we start educating, then we need every airport to do a drone vulnerability and risk assessment. They need to incorporate it into their comprehensive security and safety programs, but it has to be part of changing the dynamic or the legacy of physical security or the way we look at how we create safe zones around airports and other facilities. Airports will focus here because it doesn't exist. Now, I know there are some airports I've been told that have trained in the program that I teach across the country and have then implemented this drone assessment into the airports. That's step number one. Then we develop drone emergency response plans, policy, procedure, and then standard operating procedures, what are called SOPs, around how we're going to act when we have a drone event. And then lastly, we have to have an operational, or what in the military we call a CONOP, right? A concept of operations, on how we're going to proactively react, but we want to focus on the word proactive. We want to be proactively reacting to a potential drone event. And then everyone that's in that ecosystem, it's a well-oiled machine. So the question you're asking is, it's not hard to do. It's simply synchronizing and coordinating all the way from understanding the foundations of the technology and the detection technology, doing a real-world assessment on your airport. And you can do this technically, and you can do this with security professionals, but really understanding what is your drone threat, what is the critical assets you want to protect? Airplanes, pilots, people, those all fall in that category.
Right, yeah.
What are the vulnerabilities based on the technology? And then how are we going to mitigate the risk? So how can we mitigate that risk? The next part is this developing the right policy that doesn't tie your hands, and then procedures and SOPs that get you to operations, which means you have trained people that if you detect a drone at a relatively good distance that allows you to make decision, you could even send a police officer or law enforcement officer to where the drone is flying from, to the operator. You could really, we call it geolocating the operator. So that's a step that could be taken. So there's so many things we could do to lift our awareness and our safety posture.
Right. I think awareness is a key piece of it, because obviously we know just recently FAA approved more access for drones in the airspace. At ALPA, we're not anti-technology. We embrace technology. And we know that the drone industry is trying to do this responsibly,
right?
Because they know that if one of these drones hits an airliner, that it's going to reflect negatively on their own industry. It just seems like it's these either, you use the term, just people that don't know any better. They're out there curious and clueless. That's a perfect way of saying it.
We did have a drone hit an aircraft in California during the fires. I think it was an aircraft that responds to fires for water distribution, I believe. Yeah. And a drone operator hit that airplane. And it hit the tail, and it did significant damage to the airplane. So I don't know the results of it, but I do know that was an event. And I think I showed you the results of a small drone like this hitting the wing of an airplane. Yep. And I know you're all great, and you're going to get us, you're going to land that aircraft, but we don't know how it's going to.
As the drones get bigger, the threat becomes much more significant, because I think the testing has only been to maximum of like a 3-pound drone so far hitting an airplane. Well, now we're up to 1,300 pounds at these things. And
if you look at the categories, how these drones are categorized. So like, for instance, what we're seeing out of the Iran conflict now, most of the drones we're seeing are the name of them are Shahed. They're Iranian drones. Every country is mimicking that version of what it looks like. But it's basically, it's the size of a very small car,
right,
in some cases, and it's probably getting closer to that 500, 600-pound weight. I'm just guessing. I don't know the exact weight. But commercially, there's available drones. You could go to drones that are agricultural drones, are actually fairly big as well, that would do significant damage to an airplane if it was.
Yeah, if you hit it something that size, it's just going to be.
Yeah, the bigger they get, obviously it's mass, right?
Yeah,
it's mass against.
We're moving at quite a big clip. We test these things with birds and all that stuff and engines. You'll hear the stories about that over the years, but we've never tested it with something that large.
Exactly.
That's definitely a concern. So, is there anything we can do today as pilots in the flight deck to mitigate this, other than keep our eyes open in case we see something?
I mean,
and by the time we see something at the rate of speed we're moving, not much we can do anyway.
Number one is just awareness. If you can have the awareness that there's potentially these small drones or these types of platforms in the airspace, and keep an eye out, be aware of it. But really, it's about an organization like yours, right? Getting to Capitol Hill and talking to our legislators about why it's important. Again, the key, delegate the ability to detect and defeat or mitigate this to the lowest level, train, certify those people, hold them accountable. But it's really about the authorities to do what's right here, to protect true passenger aircraft, aviation assets, airports. We've got to put the tools in the hands of our professionals that do this work day to day to help maintain security and safety, because it's not normal physical security anymore.
Right.
So even in airport threat and vulnerability risk assessments, I bet if you took a census or you took a poll of how many of those airports actually have a drone vulnerability risk assessment built in to their current security, you're going to find very few.
If there is some encouraging news out of this, our bit here is the fact that this technology is starting to be used, and that, like you said, there's legislation has been passed where they're going to start delegating some of this. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. While this is obviously very alarming, I had no idea, like I said early on in this, that there were so many, blundering, for lack of a better term, into our airspace and doing that. Well, thank you for all this information. And before we end, last week when I had made some prepared remarks and you were in the room, I was talking about the importance of keeping a minimum of 2 well-rested, trained, and qualified pilots on the flight deck at all times, because obviously there are some special interests or manufacturers out there that are pushing a single pilot cruise concept or a single pilot concept, and obviously having at least 2 pilots working together on the flight deck is the core behind what the safety system is about. You brought up when you started your remarks that when you were a platoon commander in an M1 Abrams, that there was a push to reduce the number of servicemen in the tank, and that you were on the forefront of that. So please share that story for us.
Yeah, I was a young officer, and there were I don't know if anyone was necessarily pushing it, but there was a lot of discussions at a unit I was in where we were talking about taking an M1 Abrams crew is four people, and being able to operate that equipment, which is a heavy battle tank,
right,
main battle tank for the U.S. Army, with 3 people. And I was a very, very junior officer at the time, and I was asked my opinion, and I gave my opinion, which I said, after being a platoon leader of an M1 tank platoon for a significant amount of time, I didn't think it was possible for us to maintain and operate the main battle tank with one less person. So when you talked about this whole idea of one less pilot or one pilot, it as a passenger or as someone that flies a lot, I'm like, why? That doesn't make any sense. We do everything in buddy teams, especially in the Army, and especially with the M1. We deployed on that tank with 4 people for a reason, because every single person had a role in that piece of equipment. And to me and to others that were there in the room, it was not possible.
Yeah.
So it didn't pass common sense to us.
Yeah, and we're fighting the same thing today with the airplane. It's that human element, the critical decision-making and everything in the heat of the battle that is essential to have people.
I'm going to be a big advocate for you on that, because I spend a lot of time in airports, travel around, and I want my pilots fresh, and I want them to be able to take breaks and to be able to get us safely from point A to point B. And frankly, we have great aviators in this country and all across the globe, so appreciate it.
Thank you for that. Thanks a lot for joining me today, Bill, and for coming to our cargo symposium. The information you shared is critical for both our knowledge as operators in the airspace and to inform our work closing safety threats as safety and security advocates at ALPA. It's really important what you do, and we appreciate that. Well, thanks for tuning in. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. And if you enjoyed this episode, let your fellow crew members know about the show. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, reach out to podcast@alpa.org. To listen and subscribe to the Airline Pilot Podcast or learn more about ALPA, check us out online at alpa.org or find us on all major podcast platforms. Until next time, this is the Airline Pilot Podcast. Production copyright ALPA 2026. All rights reserved. Thanks and have a safe flight.
This podcast is brought to you by the Airline Pilots Association. ALPA supports its pilots through a variety of resources, including DART, the Data Action Report Program. DART gives pilots one location to ask any question of their pilot group leaders and experts, and provides reporting with trackable, sortable data for their MEC to use. If your pilot group uses DART, you can find it in the ALPA app or at dart.alpa.org. Throw us a dart today.